Other man has been looking very closely at the Teals and how they might go this time around is Simon Welsh. He is the director at RedBridge Group. Simon, great to see you. What are the focus groups telling you in terms of the feedback, what people want from the Teals, how happy they are about their performance as well? Because I wanted to, again, remind viewers, particularly here in Wentworth, I've got this internal party polling that's confidential, but we're able to bring it to you here on AM Agenda this morning. It shows that local candidates matter. Knox, since July, has really increased the favourability of the Liberal Party. You can see the numbers there, plus 24 Knox, Allegra Spender plus 14, the party brand, Teal's minus 10, the Liberals plus 13. Now that's just here in Wentworth. There is the anti-Semitic issue, Simon, that's absolutely playing into this, but give us a snapshot of all the Teal seats and how this might be able to be replicated, or if it does replicate in some of those other seats.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think sort of the Teal story, if I can sort of try and simplify it, because they are complex, they are different seats, they've got their own dynamics and things. But I think broadly speaking, there's kind of three cohorts of voters that we sort of need to think about when we're thinking about these Teal seats. One of which is good for the Liberals and two of which aren't. So we've got a cohort of sort of aspirational voter in these seats that really value delivery, really value competence in government in their elected representatives. These are the group, they came off Morrison in 2022, particularly around the back end of the COVID pandemic, when those issues around his competence, the vaccine rollout, these sorts of things, those sorts of issues brought them off Morrison and onto the Teals. These are the voters who, because of the economic conditions, are drifting back to the Liberals. So they're drifting, those that did go to the Teals, and they are sort of more inherently conservative voters because they highly value individual aspiration, individual economic opportunity, those sorts of things. So those that did are sort of drifting back to the Liberals, and that's where I think you're sort of seeing these positive results in the polling for the Liberals in these Teal seats. But the sort of the core of that Teal vote being that sort of highly educated, high income, progressive middle sort of voter, they're not really moving. And I don't think anyone would really expect them to. That sort of values disconnect around Peter Dutton sort of is sort of an inherent barrier there. The really interesting bit, though, and the bit that I suspect will be decisive, is the demographic change in these seats. So the younger voters coming in, where you're getting sort of density in housing in these electorates is really the story here, because that is bringing in younger, yes, university educated, yes, relatively high income sort of earners, but moving into apartments and flats and these sorts of things. The change in the voter roll since 2022 is a story of thousands of these younger voters coming in. And there's a couple of things around that's problematic. First of all, they lean progressive, so we know that's kind of problematic for the Liberals to begin with. But they are the beating heart of this dissatisfaction with either major party. So they are the beating heart of people looking to put their vote in a third way. And that is great news for the Teal independents. The other thing about them is they are incredibly difficult to poll, almost impossible to poll. So whenever you see any seat-level polling, particularly if it's seat-level polling that's done by what we call robo-polling, that's those annoying, hi, automated phone calls, hi, I'm calling from RedBridge, sort of polling, grossly underestimates that vote. So you've always got to apply a bit of grain of salt, or maybe half a dozen grains of salt to any sort of seat-level polling that you see, because it's probably not picking up that cohort, and that cohort is likely to be the most decisive across these Teal electorates. Now, you've got a couple of exceptions there. It's Curtin and Goldstein, who happen to have much higher proportions of that aspirational voter than the other Teal seats. Just because of the geography and the demography, it's just the way it works out in those two seats. And that makes them a bit more vulnerable. But they've still got that story going on with thousands upon thousands of younger voters moving into these electorates through density in housing, that's sort of tipping the scale back towards the Teals. So yeah, it's a fascinating demographic change story in these seats.
Okay, so a few caveats there, Simon, and just to recap a little bit. So what is helping the Liberals is this economic security argument. People want to see a little bit more stability in the middle of a cost of living crisis. But on the flip side, demographic changes in Teal seats, a lot of younger voters coming in, is helping reinforce that independent vote. What about the Jewish issue, the anti-Semitism issue, because this is huge here in Wentworth. We're talking about a population of 16% Jewish population in Wentworth. It's a bit less, I believe, in seats like Kooyong and Goldstein in Victoria. I guess the question here is, was there a high proportion of Jews that voted for the Teals last time round that would switch their vote back to the Liberals? Do you think that would be quite negligible in terms of that vote shift and how it might affect the outcomes in seats like Wentworth?
Yeah, I don't think it's negligible, but there's certainly a shift going on. There's certainly sort of a group within the Jewish community that is responding well to the Liberals' stronger messaging, if I can use that phrase, around anti-Semitism, the conflict in Gaza, and those sorts of things. But like many of these sort of communities, we've got to be really careful not to think of them as homogenous things that sort of move en bloc. There are differences within the community, but certainly there is a part of the Jewish community that is moving towards the Liberals in this election, in those seats that you've talked about there. But again, those numbers compared to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12,000 young people that are moving in, it's what makes the Liberals competitive in seats like Goldstein. It's definitely part of what makes them competitive, but is it going to be enough? That's the bit that's really hard to predict based on polling, because, as I mentioned before, it's really hard to poll these electorates and poll these particular cohorts. But there's certainly stuff happening. It's certainly part of what's keeping the Liberals in play in these seats. But the numbers, I think, still, my gut feel is that the numbers would still balance in favour of the Teal independents just through that demographic change.